A woman in New Mexico shot a man she said was breaking into her home. Now, at first, she was arrested for voluntary manslaughter, and a judge ended up dismissing the charge. But now investigators say it might actually be a murder. We're breaking down the major updates in this case with New Mexico criminal defense attorney Alyssa Turacco. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, this is an odd case out of Clovis, New Mexico. 29-year-old Alexandra Romero was arrested back in August after she shot and killed a man that she found in her home. She called police to say that there was a burglary happening, and when police got there, the man, Javier Jimenez, was dead. Now, it turns out the 39-year-old Jimenez was actually Romero's ex-boyfriend. Yeah, she was reportedly in the process of getting a restraining order against him when he was killed. According to records, police had picked up Jimenez multiple times before at Romero's home, charging him with trespassing as recently as 2022. That's what the reporting indicates. And police did an investigation of the shooting, and they presented the evidence to a grand jury in October. And according to the district attorney, the grand jurors were presented with the law for second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and self-defense. The jurors ended up indicting Romero on a voluntary manslaughter charge. We'll talk about that. Now, Romero had been locked up since her arrest in October and was just released in January when the judge decided to dismiss the charge. Why? Because District Court Judge Ben Cross ruled Romero was denied the right to testify before the grand jury. But then just 5 days later, Romero was under arrest again. Prosecutors say they found, quote, inconsistencies with Romero's initial statement about what happened inside of her home, but they didn't elaborate on what those inconsistencies might be. What we do know is that she is back behind bars without bond because now she is facing a charge of murder. Let me bring in right now a special guest to talk about this. Former state senator out of New Mexico and current criminal defense attorney, Alyssa Turacco. Great to have you here, Alyssa. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is so interesting to me because on a basic level, if you can explain to us, now that they have upgraded this charge from voluntary manslaughter to murder, what does that tell us?
I find it absolutely unbelievable. Unfortunately, it's believable because our criminal justice system does that. But this is what I think happened. So there's they do the first indictment. And there's these procedural defects. There's problems with the indictment, and I do want to tell you what.
But before we even get into that, just let's be clear about what voluntary manslaughter is and what murder is, and what the prosecution is now saying they believe happened in terms of the actual legal definition. Break it down for us.
Okay, so murder one is the premeditated, planned, that malicious intent. That's the highest degree of murder in New Mexico.
Right.
And that is life in prison. Life in New Mexico would be 30 years. And then after the 30 years, you go before the parole board and they may or may not let you out. So life could be coming out of prison in a body bag. Life could be 30 years, but nonetheless, this is the highest penalty in New Mexico. Then you have second degree murder. And then you have the third degree, which is the voluntary manslaughter. And that's the heat of passion, you're losing yourself. The classic one is, when someone finds their lover in bed with someone else and just knows they're shooting, but just loses kind of control over themselves. So they started out with the voluntary manslaughter. But when the judge quashed the grand jury indictment and he canceled and closed that first case out, what I think the prosecutor was thinking, and I don't know, this is just pure speculation, but I think the prosecutor was thinking, okay, we're going to take it back. We're going to do this again. The judge said, you did it wrong. You need to do it again. And it's really kind of interesting about how they did it wrong, by the way. But, and so the prosecutor said, okay, we're going to do first degree because we're going to give all of it to the judge. We're going to give you first degree. We're going to give you second degree. We're going to give you voluntary manslaughter. And we're going to give you self-defense. And so you pick, and that's usually how they do it. They usually kind of throw all the murders, so to speak, on the indictment. And then they say, okay, you pick which one that it should be. And I think that's why they're doing it. It looks very evil and vindictive. But I think they're giving the judge all of these choices.
In other words, they're saying she planned this. She wanted to kill him. She intended to kill him. This is not just he broke in. She, in a heat of passion, in the heat of the moment, she killed him. This was more methodical. This was more intentional.
I don't know that they're saying that. I think that they're giving that option.
Okay.
So like the first time they took the case, they took it to the grand jury.
Right.
They're taking the case back, but now they're taking it directly to a judge and they're going to have a public hearing on it. Yep. So they're not going to give it to the grand jury again and say this is a premeditated killing. Now I think I'm speculating and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Personally, I don't think they should take the case at all, but I think they're giving the judge all these choices. Judge, you can pick first degree. If it's not premeditated, then go to second degree. So I think they're kind of throwing a whole smorgasbord out there and saying you pick what you want.
Right. What do they think they mean by inconsistencies in her initial account or with her initial statement?
Well, I think that she probably gave one statement and didn't include enough details. And then her second statement had different details. And we see that a lot with trauma where, people give an initial statement and then as they calm down from all kind of the emotional part of that, and they're able to give a few more details, or maybe they even remember things differently depending on who talks to them. So inconsistent statements are not that unusual. I think that we all give inconsistent statements.
But they felt it was enough to upgrade it to murder, right?
I don't know that they're really upgrading it to murder. It looks like they are. I'm hoping they're not.
Right.
I'm hoping they're just giving the judge some options.
By the way,
it doesn't seem like it's planned, does it?
Well, there's so few details about this, and the idea that what I think really works well for a defense counsel in this case, and I think you're explaining it really well, is the backstory between the two is problematic for a prosecution. If you have a guy who was continuing to break into her place and was there, and she was trying to get a restraining order, those are details that I think are problematic for a prosecution.
Well, and he had threatened her. He had been stalking her. He had threatened her. He had told her he was going to kill her, that she deserved to die. So this had been going on the weeks before this particular, the day that he actually breaks into her. And the other thing that's scary for me is that he was in her house. It wasn't like she shot him outside or she shot him at a shopping mall or a gas station. He was inside her home. So at what point, when someone comes inside your home and a person who had been threatening you and who you sought a restraining order against, at what point is it self-defense?
Let's talk about that. I think it's a great question because so many times people say, well, if a burglar, whether or not you know them or not, if a burglar comes in, you see them, can you just take out a gun and shoot them? Because let's be clear, even if they had the backstory here with the alleged domestic abuse or the idea of the restraining order or that he kept breaking in, someone just doesn't have the right to murder another human being, right? But what is the rule in New Mexico in terms of someone breaks in, your ability to use lethal force?
Yeah, you are allowed to use lethal force. We are a stand your ground state, protecting your property. Her children were also in the home at the time of the shooting. But I think you're right. If someone just walks in and they're like, oh, the wrong house, you can point your gun and say, get out of my home. I mean, you're right. There is kind of a level. I don't think it just gives you a per se right to kill someone if they come in your house. But we already know that this man was different for her. That the fear that she had for him was real because she had sought the restraining order. So I'm not so sure it's just that he walked in and she just shot him in cold blood. That doesn't seem to really fit, into these facts.
I wonder how they learned about inconsistencies, whether it was another eyewitness saying, wait a minute, that didn't happen, or they found cell phone footage, cell phone evidence that contradicts something, or maybe her stories were different. It's just interesting that now they discovered something that was different. And I find that very interesting.
Well, in New Mexico, the officers have to wear body camera. Mm-hmm. So anytime that an officer has a contact with a civilian, they must be running their body camera. So I suspect that the inconsistencies were from the first time they interviewed her, this one officer, and they've got that on video and they can watch that. And then the next time that they interview her and they've got the body camera of that, or maybe when she's sitting in the car, maybe with a female officer, and she kind of discloses something else. So that's what I would suspect that it is. Of course, I
Right.
don't know.
By the way, as we cover these kinds of stories, you know what I think about a lot? How important it is to have a good lawyer. And that is not easy to find, especially in personal injury cases. That can be half the battle. Well, that is why I want to take a minute to talk about Attorney Tom and Associates, our great sponsor of this episode of Sidebar. So whether you were injured in a car wreck or maybe even a refinery explosion, maybe you're the victim of securities fraud, maybe you received a notification that your information was included in a data breach, got sick because of a drug or a toxic exposure, many other situations too, Attorney Tom can help. Now, of course, Tom and his team have the legal knowledge and the legal skills. That's a given, but they also care. They have genuine empathy for their clients, and having somebody that you can trust is so important. Every call is free, private. You're going to be speaking with a member of his team straight away. You don't pay them unless you win, which just further shows their commitment to your success. And speaking of which, they have an incredibly impressive track record in these tough cases. Look, if your case is not the best fit for Attorney Tom and his team, they still may be able to recommend you a lawyer using their national network of attorneys. But with Attorney Tom and his team, you're not just hiring a lawyer, okay? You are getting powerful allies who are committed to your well-being. So if you've suffered an injury and you need legal support, click the attorneytom.com/sidebar link pinned in the comments for a free consultation or dial 855-TOM-WINS. All right, let's get back into it. Let me ask you about by the fact that the original grand jury indictment was dismissed because she was denied her right to testify before the grand jury. People might be saying, wait a minute. I thought grand juries were completely secret. I thought it's only the prosecution putting on evidence. This idea that Romero would have had a right to testify. Walk us through that.
Okay, so every state's different. In New Mexico, we have a grand jury system, and you're allowed to have notice. So you get a letter in the mail saying that we are going to present your case to the grand jury. What happened was she found out by accident, by a third party, that they were going to present her case to the grand jury. And so she did not get the letter, which you're required, the government's required to send you a letter and let you know that your case is being presented to the grand jury. So she goes to the DA's office and she says, I heard that, my case is going to be presented to the grand jury. They tell her the date and they tell her the time and they tell her the place. So then she goes on that date and that time to the grand jury presentment and says, I want to testify. I want to tell my side of the story. And either the DA, the prosecutor, or one of the prosecutor's staff sends her away and says, you're not allowed to testify. You're too late. They're already, they've already started, so you don't get to testify. So when the defense attorney brought this before the judge in New Mexico, and I'm certain that, he had to have argued constitutional rights. We have a constitutional right to be a part of our case. We have a constitutional right to give information. And the DA, the prosecutor, in some way was withholding information by not letting her go before the grand jury and tell her story. So that is pretty severe bad faith. That's a very severe action on the part of the prosecution to turn her away. Basically, they're withholding evidence from the grand jury.
Interesting. I think it's a fascinating. I think it's a fascinating legal case. Before I let you go, I just wanted your opinion on something. One of the things that caught my eye on it was, and we cover, so many different mugshots on this show. I just was a little like her mugshot. She almost looked like she was smiling, a little like smug. I'll actually show it to you.
I don't see that.
So, I don't know. It seemed like a little smile. I was curious what you thought of that. I always wonder how people take mugshots.
Okay, I'll tell you. I see a young woman. I just see I'm smiling this whole time.
Yes,
so
but you are not charged with
serious.
you're not charged with potentially murder. So it's just or
true.
manslaughter. It's just
Yeah,
it's
let's
the
keep it
issue of
that way.
I just find people's mugshots so interesting. I find them very telling.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So what did you think it was telling of?
I don't know. I think it's almost like it could be someone's uncomfortable. It could be like this is nerves. It could be like some people like I don't think I did anything wrong. Sometimes they're under the influence of a substance. Just thought it was
Right.
interesting. Thought the mugshot was interesting, but it's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you could be on the prosecution team.
Well, I don't think that they wouldn't use that mugshot as proof of anything in this kind of case. But listen, Alyssa Turacco, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Very nice meeting you. And let's keep in touch for other cases.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.